Um, I can't actually see you, Steve, on my screen, but I'm sure you're one there in one of the many pictures on the screen. But Steve, you are in Melbourne, of course, at the moment, uh, in lockdown. How are you at the moment this morning?
I'm very well. It's true. Good morning, everyone. It's really great to be here, and thank you very much, Peter, for the invitation, and Oliver for that lovely introduction, and for Jag, lovely to hear what you were saying. It was beautiful to just always to hear how people are living their lives and what challenges they're facing. So, yeah, I'm in lockdown in Melbourne with I think a number of other. I've recognised a few faces in the audience, which is the audience. We call it an audience online. I'm not sure, but among you men there, and yes, waiting for this 13th of September, hoping that our government will allow us sort of out. Big challenge for me probably at the moment is the prospect of not being at my daughter's wedding, my oldest daughter, who was going to be married on the 4th of July, and it was moved back when COVID hit in March to the 26th of September. This is a wedding for Melbourne. She and her fiance live in different places in Sydney. But they've moved it now to Sydney, and they've moved it back to the 3rd of October in order to allow us to squeeze in if we can get 2 weeks of quarantine after the lockdown finishes. But at the moment, they really need to go ahead with their wedding because of different reasons. And so it's pretty heartbreaking to think that I might be watching the wedding like this and not being actually present at it.
Mm. Yeah, that's a real personal face to this lockdown. And could you ever have imagined in the middle of winter that there's not a game of AFL played in Melbourne?
No, I could not. Actually, one of my sons said to me yesterday, said, Dad, summer, spring and summer are the best months. I don't like autumn because it means winter's coming. And the only good thing about winter is footy, and there's no bloody footy on. So we can't go to the MCG, which is, pretty tough for our family. So yeah, it's a very strange year for sure. Lots of difficulties, but also lots of surprising blessings. So that's try and focus on those as well.
Well, why don't we start with footy? So you came to the Hawthorn club in the 80s. And look, I have to confess, I didn't grow up watching AFL, but I gather in the 80s, Hawthorn was really at the height of its powers. What was it like joining the club then?
Yeah, it's true. It was an extraordinary club to come to. Hawthorn played in 7 consecutive grand finals from 83 to 89. And so, and 5 premierships during that period. So it was a dominant, well, up until 91. So if you count another grand final 2 years later. So the players that I arrived to become teammates of as a skinny 17-year-old in 1987 were really the superstars of the competition. And, these are the likes of Brereton and Di Domenico and Langford, Dunstall, Platten, names that if you know AFL, you know that they are, the amazing players of that period. And I was totally overawed. I remember being so embarrassed because I couldn't do one chin-up in the gym. I was, could hardly do it. So I was, avoided those sort of moments in the gym. But also very big personalities, and a lot of them were on TV and things like that. So it was actually an incredibly supportive environment. There was a lot of great challenges. Our coach was legendary coach Alan Jeans at that time. We heard the introduction from Oliver about coaches, and I learnt a lot from him. It was a very tough, environment. I remember vomiting for most of the training sessions in my first pre-season, thinking I'm never going to survive this, and thinking they're going to turf me out. But I managed to survive and hang in there. So look, it was a very tough environment, very disciplined, but also a very upbuilding place. And I think it was very good for me to be in that place at that time.
And then, as you said, Hawthorn made many premierships. One of them was in '89, I remember.
That's true. So this is one of the legendary games. When people look back, they say this is probably one of the great grand finals of all time. And Hawthorn was playing Geelong. I've been at the club for 3 years, and Hawthorn was winning by 38 points at half time. So you would think a solid lead, but actually 3 of our players were very, very seriously injured. Platten, Di Domenico, and Brereton. And Dipper, we know, actually ended up had 3 broken ribs and a punctured lung, and played most of the game out, but was really playing on empty. He went to hospital after the game and spent days in hospital. And Alan Jeans, of course, knew this. Our coach knew this at half time. And so there were only 2 players at that time allowed to be on the bench. So we were pretty much undermanned already. And he knew that Hawthorn had to hold on. And there was this very famous halftime speech where basically the players were in the room after the sort of slight warm down period. And he said, he started the meeting by saying, a young boy walked into a shoe shop and he saw a pair of shoes there and he wanted to buy this pair of shoes, a very, very nice pair of shoes. Now, of course, the players at this point are thinking, he's off his rocker. What's he talking about? Here we are at halftime in a grand final. And, the coach is talking about a boy going into a shoe shop. And he said, it's a very nice pair of shoes. I'd like to buy those pair of shoes. And then he realized as he moved a little bit further on that there was a much better pair of shoes, a magnificent pair of shoes. But he saw that it was a much more expensive pair. And he thought to himself, I'd like those, but they cost more. And then Alan Jeans, the good coach, Oliver, asked a good question. He said, what should he do? Should he buy the pair that's a good pair, or should he buy the amazing pair, the expensive pair? And of course, some of the players are learning, catching on that he's comparing the difference between being in a grand final and winning the grand final. The good pair of shoes. Some players could go, look, we've made it to the grand final. That's good enough. Others, let's win this game. And so Jeans then went on to say, what has he got to do? Then he starts yelling, pay the price! Pay the price! Pay the price! The players are, the hair going back on the top of their shoulders and on their necks, pay the price! And he just kept yelling it again and again and again. And then some of the more senior players realised, this is the end of the meeting. And so they start getting up and everyone starts to move out. And of course, the adrenaline's pumping. We've got to do absolutely everything in order to hold on and win this game. Pay the price! And they're sort of walking down the race, going on back out on the ground. And instead of the coach going straight up, he's walking down, following them up. There's echoing in their ears as they walk through as they walk down through the race onto the ground. Pay the price! And of course, as we know from history, Geelong, who was an amazingly attacking team, came back and kicking goal after goal after goal after goal. And Hawthorn was substantially undermanned by this time, but hung on by a thread. And Geelong lost by 6 points, but had the game gone on for another couple of minutes, it was certain that they would have won. But in the end, Hawthorn won the premiership.
Wow.
And what's significant about that game, is that during the season or leading up to the grand final, I'd actually only played two matches in that season. And Alan Jeans had said to me, look, we're going to need a backup ruckman. I'd had a couple of injuries, had a fractured cheekbone and a broken finger in the previous season. So I'd had a good start, but I was kind of ambling along. And he said to me, look, we're going to need a backup ruckman to play in the grand final, possibly if we get into it. But I was not substantially tuned in to that opportunity. And so I was not selected for that match, which bitterly disappointing when I look back on. I thought, I've actually lost an opportunity here to play in a grand final. And so it really made me realise I better just get organised, get myself focused. And so I really knuckled down after that grand final. And 2 years later, fortunately, I did play in my own grand final, 1991. And I was really fortunate to be a player of the finals in that season. So, ups and downs, but the environment was extraordinary. And I learnt a lot by being coached under Jeans.
Wow. Well, you sort of just slipped in there at the very end that you were actually player of the finals in 1991. So congratulations there. You don't have any paraphernalia to show us, do you?
Now, you asked me that and I've completely forgot to bring it. It's up in my cupboard. I will try and see if I can sneak out very quickly in a minute to go and grab it. But I do have it. I promise it's real.
Well, we can keep that as a treat for those who stay on to the end of their meeting. Okay. So that can be the lure. Okay, so sometimes, Steve, you hear from sportsmen and women who've made it to the top that they had this sense that that was always going to be the case. How about for you? Was it always going to be footy?
No, footy was actually, I would say I'm an accidental footy player, to be honest. My dad played Test cricket for South Africa, where I was born. Actually, we came to Australia when I was 4.5, and he was actually from Rhodesia or Zimbabwe, and only at the end of his career did he move to South Africa to play for them, because he wasn't eligible, of course. It was only after he got married. So cricket was really in my blood, and my three brothers and I played a lot of cricket. And if anything, my ambition was to play cricket for Australia. I was a very good fast bowler, sort of big hard-hitting batsman. And I played footy and hockey and others. I played a lot of sports, played rugby, and it was really, and I only started playing footy when I was about 12. And the first time I ever thought of playing AFL football, though, was when Hawthorn asked me to, and I was in year 11. So it was, okay, this is the opportunity. The door opened there, and talking with mum and dad, I realised I'm going to take the opportunity and move to Melbourne from Brisbane. When I finished my high school.
So you hadn't even played football up to that point?
I'd played it only from about 12 years of age, but it was really a kind of casual thing. I played, I became very good at it, started playing interstate footy and things like that. A lot of representative footy, but still my number one passion was cricket, and all my goals were focused on cricket. But the door opened with footy, and so in the end I had to give up playing cricket and give myself to play footy. But I do love footy. It's a fantastic sport, and I'm very involved still in many ways.
So take us back, though, to those years in Brisbane, because I understand that they were quite formative in really shaping the rest of your life.
Yeah, well, I guess probably we moved to Brisbane from Wollongong, where we lived after coming to Australia. So I lived in New South Wales for 4 years, and really from about the age of 10, we lived in Brisbane. So when I was about 12, things started to, what really sort of took place was a big significant factor was my parents, they started to go through a very difficult period in their marriage, which went on really for about 6 years. And it's a long, difficult, painful story, but my mum really went through a nervous breakdown, and became very, psychologically and aggressive towards my dad, and adopted a kind of radical feminist sort of perspective, anti-male, I don't mean equal. And so there was arguments throughout, like very, very often, most days. I often went to bed, crying. My best friend at school didn't know about it. I didn't talk about it, didn't think about talking about it. I was one of those kids who was pretty cheerful as a personality. And so when I was at school, I was pretty happy. I managed to have lots of friends in different kind of groups. I enjoyed a lot of sport. I was an above average student. So school was a happy time for me, but home life was very unhappy. My dad had started to introduce prayer in our home when I was around about 12 during that time. So my faith was beginning to grow. I come from a Catholic background, and so prayer before school became a habitual thing. But really my idea of God was, God made the world, but he seemed to be sort of outside of the clouds, tied up, powerless to sort of really enter into the world. And it was not until I was in year 10, I was 15, and I was in this very bleak period because, mum and dad were arguing a lot into the night, and it was very, very painful. And I remember, though, there was this moment where I had an encounter with the person of Jesus, and it was totally unexpected, unsolicited. I didn't even know such a thing could happen. Where I was in a very, very dark place. I really was feeling like there's no future, there's no hope, there's no way forward in my life. And, everything was really difficult, and every day dragged on. And it was in this moment, I didn't have a vision or didn't hear voices or anything like that, but had a deep conviction in my heart that I was in the presence of Jesus. And he was saying to me, I know what it's like to be in dark place. I know what it's like to feel like there is no future or no hope. When I was actually on the cross, and I was alone, and I was abandoned, and I was being crucified, I was in this intense, dark place. I want you to know, though, it's not the end of the story. It doesn't end there. That's not the finish. There is future. There is hope. There is resurrection. And of course, even though he knew that there would be resurrection, as from our faith point of view, being God, he knew that, and he prophesied that. Nevertheless, as a human person, as a human being, as a man, he'd never experienced that in his humanity. So he still had to go through it in a way of faith, as the book of Hebrews tells us. So it's, for me, it was like this moment of something. I've got to cling to this. And I don't know how, but I did believe that it was true. And I held on to this little lifeline. And it wasn't like 5 minutes later everything was different. But after a period of months, I realised I was in a different place. I felt different interiorly. I was more confident. Something had shifted. I couldn't explain it, but I knew that God was really alive. He was interested in my life. He knew what was going on, and He was going to take care of me. And really, that's been the case ever since. So for me, the following year was when I was recruited by Hawthorn, moved to Melbourne, where I got married, and my life went in a very different direction. I really feel that was a very pivotal moment, and I've never forgotten that. One of the other
Thanks.
if I can add to that, Peter, one of the other sides to that has been the experience of recognizing the woundedness of that experience and the power of those wounds. I had a school principal that I used to work for who used to say, "Wounded people wound people." I think it's true to some extent, but it's also a little bit demoralizing because we're all wounded to some extent, either through our own experiences or our own actions or other people's or circumstances. So I think there's a more true statement, which is, yes, it's true, wounded people wound people, but healed people heal people. And I found that over time, the wounds of that family experience, especially my parents' separation, have actually become a source of blessing and grace for many others, including for myself, obviously over a period of long healing. Because I was terrified of being married, as you could imagine. But I was married. I did eventually get married to Annie, and her love and so many other sources of healing have, cleansed me, I guess. And, it's interesting that the state of being resurrected in Jesus, the resurrection of Jesus is actually, he was being healed is not being fixed up as if it didn't happen. He's resurrected. He said, "Look, come touch my hands. It's really me. I'm really alive. I'm really, see my wounds, put your hand in my side," etc. And so for us, being healed, it doesn't mean fixed up as if the wounds didn't happen. It just means being able to, have a kind of glorified wounds, and those wounds then become access points for God into our life and also through us into the lives of others. And one of the things I discovered in my early 20s and beyond is how much work I was called to do with Annie, my wife, for married couples and helping them. And there's been so much grace in that. And I think God allowed those wounds to take place because He brings something greater out of it. He never allows anything to take place unless He can bring something greater out of it. And I think that's important to believe in.
Thanks, Steve, for sharing that. It's quite a beautiful insight that you had, that those wounds carry through, but they're also a source of comfort that you can bring to others. You did say that as a skinny little 15-year-old or 16-year-old,
well, not little, skinny, but not little.
Okay, skinny,
6'7",
okay,
skinny.
who can manage to punch out one chin up. You're recruited down to Melbourne. You obviously then had that faith experience and came now as a new person, in a sense, down to Hawthorn. What challenges, if any, did you face from your young faith as you joined the club?
Yeah, well, it's true. I was probably, given that part of my experience at that time was that Dad was bringing faith into our home and Mum was really opposed to it. So the choice of faith was really in the midst of, I would say, it's not too strong a word to say, a persecution. So I was perhaps oversensitive to the way other people might receive me if I was open about my faith. So I was very nervous about that. So I never really went out of my way to share it too much. But there were a number of times in my first year or two where I was put in a conflicting moment, and I really wanted to have integrity and at least try my best to be true to not only my faith, but also my values. And one example I might share with you. So one time Hawthorn was going to Phillip Island. The players were going to Phillip Island for a training camp, and we got in a bus. This was in the days at Glenferrie Oval. And I was sitting at the very back of the bus, being very tall as I am, the only place a tall guy can sit, right in the middle of the back, two guys on each side. And as the bus started to chug out of the car park, the bus driver turns onto the television at the front a pornographic film, X-rated, full-on pornographic film. And like many men in our culture, we're saturated with these sexually stimulating images, and it's very difficult not to be affected or wounded somehow by, pornography. And even in those times when there wasn't digital technology, it was around everywhere, and I had seen it. I knew this is toxic. This is not good for me. Although on the other hand, of course, I'm, there's a real magnetism, isn't there? So I thought, what do I do here? I don't need this. I need to get I need to get away from this somehow. So I sort of start looking out the window like this, trying to avert my eyes. But of course, the sound effects are still going on in full force, and ooh, ah, ooh, ah. And it doesn't leave a lot to the imagination to know what's going on. So it's also very stimulating. So I thought, this can't go on. I'm sitting here. We've got a 2-hour bus trip. What am I going to do? I can't. And I was still quite young. I was in my mid-20s and a premiership player, but nevertheless, all my teammates, and I still had at that time some of those huge personalities in the club, and champion players, and about 45 guys on the bus. And I think a lot of the coaches and officials were in the cars driving separately to the bus. And I thought, I can't sit here. What am I going to do? So I said this quiet prayer under my breath, and I didn't know what I'd do, but I found myself standing up and starting to walk down the aisle. Of course, I'm not even close. I'm the furthest place away from the bus driver. Like, this is, Anyway, I get up and I start walking, and it was a long way down, as you could imagine. But about halfway down, I started to hear this, ooh, accumulative, ooh, Stevie, that was my nickname. Stevie's going to do something. And as I got closer and closer, I had no idea what I would do. And I might have looked confident, walking down there, but my knees were knocking. My sweat was dropping down the side of my face. My tongue was going dry, and I was very frightened. I didn't know what to do. But as I got closer and closer, immediately just behind the bus driver, I noticed to my left, to his left, and the first seat behind him was a player named Luke McCabe, who I knew was 17. So I leant down into the bus driver's ear and I said to him, "You have a minor on board this bus. What you're doing is illegal." I don't know if it was or not, but I said, "What you're doing is illegal. Turn it off." Now, I expected him to turn around and say, "F off, mate," or something like that. But so the first surprise took place immediately. He just turned it off. Didn't turn around, didn't say anything. Wow. Because often we don't get that kind of, immediate acquiescence to our suggestions when they go against, but there was this, going on in the back behind me. I'm thinking, oh no. Anyway, that was the easy part, because then I had to turn around and face my 45 teammates and wait for the abuse to be hurled at me and the virtual tomatoes to be thrown at me. And I walked back, and it took a long time. It was twice as far going back than it was actually walking down. And I sat down in my chair. No one said anything. I was shocked. Two guys sitting there talking to each other. Like nothing happened. 2 hours passed. No one mentioned it. 3 days of the training camp. There's lots of opportunities to chat, there's a lot of, after meals or after in the showers or, hanging around when there's games as well as the training part. No one mentioned it. The whole season, 1994, never mentioned. In fact, for the remainder of my footy career, another 5 seasons, it was never, ever mentioned. And I actually began to wonder, did I imagine this? Is it like what happened on the footy trip stays on the footy trip, or was it a figment of my imagination? It took 18 years, until anybody ever mentioned it to me. It was actually at the funeral of Alan Jeans, or just after I had coffee with 2 of our teammates, Andy Collins and Darren Pritchard, both of whom played in a few premierships, great players. And Andy Collins raised it, and he said, "Steve, do you remember the time you turned the porno off on the bus?" I said, "Yes, I remember." I'm not going mad, And he said, "Well, I need to tell you a story about that." I said, "Oh, what is it?" He said, "Well, as you know, I've been coaching in South Australia for a number of years. And I often," he was a senior coach in the South Australian Football League. And he said, "And I often get to speak, all around the state, to school groups, community groups, business groups, etc., on the topic of leadership." And he said, "I want you to know, I always tell that story." I said, "Really? I've never heard it back." He said, "Yeah, I reckon I've told about 10,000 people that story." I said, "What?" Here am I thinking no one's ever thought of it. It's gone. And he said, "Yeah, and he said, I want you to know that when I tell that story, I say that it's the greatest act of leadership I've ever seen." I said, "Really? Wow." I mean, I'm not sure if I would agree, but that's what he said. He said, because you knew it was the right thing to do. You knew nobody agreed with you, but you still did it.
Mm.
And Darren Pritchard said, yeah, that was amazing. And here am I thinking for 18 years that these guys thinking I'm an idiot, you know, or I didn't know what they were thinking. And what I really needed to hear the story back told to me, this story, because it taught me a few things. It taught me, you know, just do what's right always. You never know your audience. You really never know your audience. Even if one person or two people, it could be, you know, and it has, you know, doing the right thing also has its own power. And I'm not saying this because I've always done everything the right way. Obviously, lots of times I've failed, but in this moment I didn't, and it was quite extraordinary to see that this had its own life. And I think there's something, God, of course, I think was working in and through this. But I learned a lot too about leadership, and it constantly reminds me to, okay, just do what's right. Doesn't matter how many people are against it. It doesn't matter about the political winds or anything. Just do what's right, and God will open the doors if you want.
Well, that's very encouraging. Thank you for sharing that. Perhaps one last question before we do throw it open for a general question time. And reminder that if you'd like to ask questions, please do use that raise hand function. So you said, Steve, along the way that you did marry Annie and you've now had 6 children, actually. So there's a life outside of footy, believe it or not. What are some of the, or perhaps the main challenge that you've faced outside of football?
Yeah, we obviously prepared this question. There are a lot of possible answers to this, but I might share one story. Obviously, I think it's true. I've been very blessed. Annie and I just had our 27th wedding anniversary in December, and we have 6 kids, aged between 26 and 14, 3 girls and 3 boys. And family life has been very beautiful and rich. And we have a lovely marriage, and we have do a lot of ministry with married couples. But nevertheless, even really good marriages have difficulties. And there was a time when about 7 or 8 years ago, where I really was feeling like, you know, Annie was quite distant from me, and I couldn't quite explain it. I didn't feel that she was cherishing me. She certainly didn't want me to touch her in bed. And there was a wall. There was quite a wall there, and I was very, you know, I prayed a lot about it. I sort of challenged her one time, and I said, "Look, I'm feeling that you don't cherish me. I really don't feel cherished by you." And she said, "Well, I'm not cherishing you." Okay. Well, why not? You know, and we've always had this arrangement since our very early marriage, you know, not to let the sun go down on our anger. So to try and resolve something, you know, to create a platform whereby we could easily ask for forgiveness and quickly forgive, which is not always easy, but it was good to be able to have that. And so we've tried to live that, but it's not been always, you know, the simplest. And so anyway, on this particular occasion, and he said, well, and I said, well, come on, you've got to tell me. If you're feeling like, you've got to tell me what it is. And she said, well, actually, there is something. Okay, what is that? And I had a real sense this is an important conversation. And she started to tell me about when Ambrose, our youngest, was, when she was giving birth to him, which was, you know, he's now 14. So it was about 7 years before. So it took 7 years. Okay, she said, you know, during the labour, you were on the phone a lot. During this time, I was one of the directors of the World Youth Day in Sydney, you know, when the Pope came. And I had a very big responsibility. 500,000 people were coming, a lot of pressure and so forth. But nevertheless, she was right. I was, you know, in and out on the phone and so on. And this really had a negative impact on her. I mean, I've always tried to be present at all of the births and really support her and everything. But I was less present on this occasion, and I knew she's right, you know, she's absolutely right. So I said, look, and I knew it's not time to justify or explain. It's, you know, just admit it and say, you know. So I said, look, I'm really sorry. That's right. It was wrong of me to do that, and I should have just put everything aside and forgotten about everything else and just being 100%. I wasn't. I'm very sorry. You know, can you please forgive me? She said, yeah. That's great. Is there anything else? Well, there is, yeah, there's something else. And so she then, you know, and I knew, hold on. And in fact, it began what was a litany of little things that she'd allowed to build up. And it reminds me a little bit of beavers. You know, beavers are those little American animals that gather up sticks to build a dam. and it's not usually like it's lots of little sticks, but the dam after a while accumulates and actually blocks the whole river flow. And like the river in some ways represents, let's say, the life that flows in a marriage or in a relationship. It might be also in a relationship, not unlike, it could be a work between brother and sister or friends or work colleagues. In this case, it was me and Annie, and I felt like there was this huge dam between us. And it wasn't like, I think most relationships don't break down because of one major event. It's usually lots and lots and lots of little things. And so, those things we need to clear away as we go along. But on this particular night, it was a lot of things. And so I felt like Rocky Balboa. You know how Rocky used to sort of just take a beating? And then eventually he'd come back, I mean, not come back in the sense that, to give her a beating, of course, but it was like I knew I just needed to accept all the things that she was raising. And I just had to apologize and not make any excuse, not justify anything, but just say, I'm sorry, you're right, that I was wrong. I shouldn't have done that, or I should have done that. Now, by 3 o'clock in the morning, it would be one of those sort of marathon sort of sessions. But I could see that she had grown in confidence to speak things that she hadn't been able to say for a long time for whatever reason, and perhaps my pride had made it difficult for her. But anyway, we got to a point where I said, is there anything else? And she said, no, I think that's it. And so I said, and what was amazing was we made love that night, or early in the morning. And it was like, the unity was amazing. Whereas 6 hours earlier, I felt like, things were over. And it was a huge, huge lesson to me that what might seem insurmountable, and not only in relationships, but all sorts of difficulties, are often not that far away. And if you allow, like, God's grace and power and mercy can really transform things quite quickly if we open up ourselves and really allow him to work and really ask his help. So that was for me a massive, massive source of encouragement and hope and strength. And it made me realize, anything can really change. I mean, look, some things are beyond it, I know that. But with my parents, for example, it would seem impossible that they will ever come back together. But certainly when things are difficult, it's not the end. So that was one moment for me that's been quite special.
Steve, you've shared some amazingly personal and quite profound things with us this morning. Thank you very much. We have about 10 minutes for some Q&A. So now is everyone's opportunity. If you'd like to use that raise hand function, or if you can't find